My name is Marcella Wilson, 23 years old, and this weathered Honda Civic has been my home for the past 8 months. I am studying business at Westlake University on a partial scholarship while working two jobs to make ends meet. Since my parents died 3 years ago, I have been raising my brother Jake, who just turned 16. Today, we are heading to my Uncle Richard's mansion for the annual family reunion. My wealthy cousins Zach and Tiffany have always looked down on us, but they have no idea what my life is really like. Before I tell you my story, let me know where you are watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you want to hear more stories about finding strength in difficult situations. I never imagined my life would turn out this way. Before my parents died, we were a happy middle-class family, living in a modest three-bedroom house in the suburbs. My father was a dedicated high school math teacher, and my mother worked as a nurse at the local hospital. They were not wealthy by any means, but we always had enough. They taught me the value of education and hard work values that would soon be tested in ways none of us could have anticipated. The accident happened during my sophomore year of college. My parents were driving home from a dinner date when a drunk driver crossed the median and hit them head on. Neither survived. I still remember the police officer standing at my dormitory door, his face solemn as he delivered the news that shattered my world. In an instant, I went from being a carefree college student to the guardian of my then 13-year-old brother Jake. The following weeks were a blur of funeral arrangements, paperwork, and gut-wrenching decisions. The life insurance barely covered the funeral expenses and the remaining mortgage on our family home. There was almost nothing left over. I had to grow up fast, really fast. I was determined to finish my education knowing it was what my parents would have wanted. More importantly, I needed a degree to secure a stable future for both Jake and myself. Westlake University had offered me a partial scholarship based on my academic performance, but it still left a substantial gap that needed to be filled. Student loans could only cover so much, and I refused to saddle myself with crippling debt that would follow me for decades. So I started working. First as a barista at the campus coffee shop, taking the earliest shift from 5 a.m. to 11 a.m., so I could attend afternoon classes. The tips were decent, but not enough to cover our expenses. So I added a second job as a waitress at Bellini, an upscale Italian restaurant near campus, working from 6 p.m. until midnight 6 days a week. The schedule was brutal but necessary. Between shifts, I would squeeze in study sessions at the library, often functioning on just 4 hours of sleep. My grades suffered initially, but I gradually developed a system that allowed me to maintain a respectable GPA while working nearly 60 hours a week. There were many nights I fell asleep with my face pressed against my textbooks, only to be jolted awake by my 4:30 a.m. alarm. Jake was the primary reason I pushed myself so hard. After the accident, he went through a period of rebellion and grief that manifested in slipping grades and angry outbursts. I could not be there for him as much as I wanted to, which added to my guilt and stress. Our elderly grandmother agreed to let him live with her, as her small one-bedroom apartment could not accommodate both of us. She provided him with a stable home environment, but at 78, she could offer little financial support. 8 months ago, I faced a brutal decision. The rent on my shared apartment increased by 30%, and my roommate decided to move in with her boyfriend. I crunched the numbers repeatedly, hoping to find a solution that would allow me to maintain a roof over my head while still paying for Jake's expenses and my tuition. There was simply no way to make it work. Something had to give. That something turned out to be my housing. I had read about students living in their cars to save money, an option that seemed extreme at first. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. My 2007 Honda Civic was paid off, reliable, and just spacious enough when the back seats were folded down. I invested in a Planet Fitness membership for $10 a month, so I would always have access to showers and bathrooms. I found a small storage unit for $60 a month, where I could keep essential belongings and rotate my seasonal clothes. The campus library became my living room, and various 24-hour diners served as my occasional kitchen. It was not ideal, but it was temporary. I repeated this mantra to myself every night as I curled up in my sleeping bag in the back of my car parked in different spots around campus to avoid drawing attention from security. I never told Jake about my living situation. As far as he knew, I had found a cheaper apartment with new roommates. I made excuses about why he could never visit. The thought of him knowing his big sister was essentially homeless would have devastated him, and he had already been through enough. Which brings me to Uncle Richard, my father's older brother by 15 years. The disparity in their ages meant they were never particularly close growing up. By the time my father finished high school, Uncle Richard had already founded his first tech company. While my father chose a career in education, Uncle Richard built a business empire that eventually made him a multimillionaire. Despite their different paths, Uncle Richard maintained a relationship with our family, mostly through annual gatherings at his sprawling mansion in the wealthiest part of town. These events always felt more like networking opportunities than family reunions, with Uncle Richard using them to showcase his success and introduce his children to influential business contacts. His kids, my cousins Zach and Tiffany, grew up with every advantage imaginable: private schools, luxury cars on their 16th birthdays, and trust funds that ensured they would never have to work unless they wanted to. Zach, now 25, had recently taken a vice president position at one of his father's companies, despite having no relevant experience. Tiffany, 24, had bounced between expensive art schools in Europe before settling into a vague role as a social media influencer funded entirely by her father. They were not necessarily bad people, just completely disconnected from the reality that most people face. In their world, financial struggle was an abstract concept that happened to others, not something that could touch their charmed lives. Growing up, I had found their obliviousness almost amusing. Now, with my parents gone and my situation so precarious, their privilege felt like a personal affront. The annual family gathering at Uncle Richard's house was approaching, and for the first time I seriously considered not attending. The thought of pretending everything was fine while secretly living in my car seemed like an exercise in humiliation. But my grandmother insisted, reminding me that maintaining family connections was more important than ever now that my parents were gone. And Jake, who had always been mesmerized by the grandeur of Uncle Richard's mansion, was looking forward to the distraction from our daily struggles. So I agreed to go, knowing I would need to craft a careful facade to hide the truth of my situation from my judgmental relatives. Little did I know that this gathering would change everything in ways I could never have predicted. The invitation arrived by mail, an elegant cream-colored card, with gold embossing announcing the annual Wilson family gathering at Richard Wilson's estate. In previous years, this invitation had been merely an obligation, something my parents attended out of family duty rather than genuine enthusiasm. Now it filled me with dread. "We have to go, Marcella," my grandmother said when I called her after receiving the invitation. Her voice carried the weight of family tradition, unyielding despite my hesitation. "Family is all we have left. Richard may be full of himself, but he is still your father's brother." I sighed, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. "I know, Grandma. It is just going to be awkward. You know how they are." "Pride does not keep you warm at night," she replied, using one of her favorite expressions. "Jake is looking forward to it. That boy needs something to smile about." That was the clincher. Jake had been through so much, and his excitement about visiting the mansion was one of the few bright spots in his life recently. During our weekly dinners at Grandma's apartment, it was all he talked about. "Do you think Uncle Richard will let me try out his golf simulator this year?" Jake had asked the previous Sunday, his eyes lighting up with rare enthusiasm. "Zach said it is the same one the professional golfers use." I forced a smile, not wanting to dampen his excitement, by pointing out that Zach had probably only made that promise to appear generous in front of the adults. "I am sure he will, buddy. Just make sure you ask nicely." The truth was, preparing for this event was going to be a logistical nightmare. I needed to look presentable enough not to raise suspicions about my living situation. My wardrobe, currently stuffed into 2 duffel bags in my storage unit, consisted mainly of work uniforms and comfortable clothes for classes. Nothing appropriate for a gathering at a mansion, where the women typically wore designer outfits and real jewelry. I set aside tips from 3 consecutive dinner shifts to buy a simple but elegant navy blue dress from a thrift store. It was a size too large, but nothing a few safety pins could not fix if strategically placed. For jewelry, I borrowed a delicate silver necklace and matching earrings from Alicia, a kind coworker at the coffee shop who had no idea I had been sleeping in my car since moving out of my apartment. The week before the gathering, I spent extra time at Planet Fitness using their massage chairs to work out the knots in my back from sleeping in cramped quarters. I splurged on a deep conditioning treatment for my hair and carefully painted my nails a subtle pink. The last thing I needed was for Aunt Patricia to make one of her backhanded comments about my appearance, the kind that sounded like concern but felt like judgment. Marcella, darling, you look so tired. Are you getting enough rest? College should be the best time of your life, she had said, at the last gathering, her eyes scanning me for flaws while her voice dripped with artificial sweetness. I rehearsed answers to the inevitable questions about my living situation. I had a fictional apartment with 2 roommates prepared, complete with details about our decor and occasional roommate drama. I practiced talking about my classes with enthusiasm, ready to steer conversations away from my work schedule or financial situation. I memorized current events and celebrity gossip to fill awkward silences with neutral topics. As I meticulously prepared my car for the weekend, removing any evidence that it doubled as my home memories from previous family gatherings surfaced like unwelcome ghosts. There was the time Tiffany had asked about my average university, with a smirk, contrasting it with her semester at a prestigious art school in Paris. The time Zach had loudly questioned why anyone would choose business administration as a major when entrepreneurship cannot be taught. The uncomfortable silence when Uncle Richard had asked about my 5-year plan, and his barely concealed disappointment when it did not include founding a startup or disrupting an industry. The day of the gathering arrived with perfect weather, as if even the elements were aligned with Uncle Richard's wealth and status. I picked up Jake from Grandma's apartment, my heart swelling at how handsome he looked in his button-up shirt and khaki pants. At 16, he was already taller than me, his features increasingly resembling our father's. Grandma had declined to attend, citing her arthritis, but I suspected she simply could not bear the thought of entering the home her younger son would never visit again. "You look awesome, sis," Jake said as he climbed into the passenger seat, the compliment so sincere it brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thanks, buddy. You clean up pretty well yourself." I blinked rapidly, focusing on the road ahead. "Ready for this?" "Definitely." Uncle Richard said he might show me his new Tesla Roadster, 0 to 60 in under 2 seconds. His excitement was infectious, momentarily lifting my anxiety. As we drove across town, the neighborhoods gradually transformed from modest homes to sprawling estates. I could not help but think about the contrast between the back seat where I had been sleeping and the 6-bedroom mansion where we were heading. Both spaces belonged to the same family, separated by little more than circumstance and opportunity. Uncle Richard's estate appeared around a curved driveway, the imposing structure of glass and stone, designed to impress even the most jaded visitor. A fountain featuring a bronze sculpture of leaping dolphins dominated the circular driveway where several luxury vehicles were already parked. My dusty Honda looked painfully out of place next to Uncle Richard's Range Rover and Aunt Patricia's Mercedes convertible. As I turned off the engine, a wave of nausea washed over me. For a moment, I considered making an excuse and leaving before anyone saw us. But Jake was already out of the car, his face alight with anticipation. I took a deep breath, checked my appearance one last time in the rearview mirror, and stepped out into the bright sunshine of a world that was no longer mine. The massive double doors of Uncle Richard's mansion swung open before we even reached them, revealing Martinez, the longtime family butler. His crisp uniform and formal posture contrasted with the genuine warmth in his eyes as he greeted us. "Miss Marcella, Master Jake, welcome. The family has gathered in the main living room." He gave me a subtle nod that felt more sincere than any greeting I would receive inside. Martinez had always treated us with the same respect he showed to Uncle Richard, something I had appreciated even as a child. The foyer stretched upward to a skylight 30 feet above, illuminating marble floors, and a grand staircase that curved elegantly to the second floor. Fresh flower arrangements sat on antique tables, their perfume mingling with the scent of expensive candles. Everything was designed to communicate wealth and taste without a single word being spoken. "Marcella, Jake, you made it?" Aunt Patricia's voice echoed through the space as she emerged from a side room, arms outstretched, but not quite offering a hug. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her face showing the subtle signs of recent cosmetic procedures. She air-kissed near my cheeks, careful not to smudge her lipstick. "Let me look at you both." Her eyes performed their usual assessment, lingering on my thrift store dress. That color suits you, dear. Navy is so practical is not it. You can wear it anywhere. The comment managed to simultaneously compliment and diminish my appearance. Thank you, Aunt Patricia. You look lovely as always. I forced warmth into my voice, playing the expected role in this familiar performance. Jake, you have grown so much. She actually hugged him, perhaps because teenage boys posed no threat to her makeup. The others are inside. Richard just opened a bottle of champagne that costs more than most people's monthly rent. She laughed, oblivious to how her casual remark stung. We followed her through the house, passing rooms I had only seen in magazines: a home theater with reclining leather seats, a temperature-controlled wine cellar visible through glass walls, a gym filled with equipment that would make my Planet Fitness look like a high school weight room. The main living room was a sprawling space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens and an infinity pool that seemed to merge with the lake beyond. Family members clustered in small groups, crystal champagne flutes in hand. Uncle Richard stood near the center, commanding attention in a casual yet obviously expensive outfit of designer jeans and a tailored button-down shirt. "There they are," he boomed when he spotted us, his voice carrying the confidence of a man accustomed to being heard. "The scholar and the athlete, come in, come in." Next to him, Tiffany turned, her expression brightening with practiced charm. At 24, she resembled a polished version of her mother, with the addition of a massive diamond engagement ring that caught the light with every gesture. Her fiancé Bradley hovered nearby, the son of a real estate developer who had made his fortune gentrifying working-class neighborhoods. "Marcella." Tiffany air kissed me just as her mother had. "That dress is so cute. Is it vintage?" Her tone made the question sound like, "Is it secondhand?" Before I could respond, Zach approached, his perfectly white teeth gleaming in a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "The academic star arrives. How is the world of textbooks and theory?" He clapped Jake on the shoulder. "And the future sports champion still playing baseball champ." Jake nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, I made varsity this year, shortstop." "Fantastic, I played a bit in prep school. We should toss a ball around later." Zach's attention was already drifting back to his drink before finishing the sentence. I knew the promised game of catch would never materialize. Uncle Richard approached, drink in hand. He was tall like my father had been, but where Dad had soft edges and laugh lines, Uncle Richard was all sharp angles and calculated expressions. He had the physique of someone who paid for a personal trainer 3 times a week, but never engaged in actual physical labor. "Marcella, you look well. How is Westlake treating you? Still on track with business administration?" His questions always felt like interviews rather than genuine inquiries. "Yes, Uncle Richard. I am maintaining a 3.7 GPA despite my work schedule. My advanced marketing professor actually recommended me for an internship next summer." I tried to project confidence without sounding boastful. Internships are good starting points. Though, in my experience, real success comes from creating opportunities, not waiting for them to be offered. He took a sip of his champagne. "But I suppose the traditional route has its merits for some people." Before I could respond, he turned to Jake. "And you, young man. Your grandmother tells me your grades have improved significantly this semester. Good to hear you are taking your education seriously." Jake straightened his posture under Uncle Richard's attention. "Yes, sir. I brought my GPA up to a 3.5 this quarter." "Excellent. Discipline and focus are the foundations of success." He nodded approvingly. "Have you given any thought to college? It is never too early to start planning." As Jake eagerly discussed his hopes of athletic scholarships, I excused myself to get a drink, needing a moment away from the performance. In the kitchen, I found Martinez preparing a tray of appetizers. "Just water for me, please," I said, leaning against the counter. He filled a crystal glass with ice water and handed it to me with a gentle smile. "It is good to see you, Miss Marcella. Your father would be proud of how you are looking after your brother." The unexpected kindness nearly cracked my carefully constructed facade. "Thank you, Martinez. That means a lot. If you need anything during your visit, please let me know." Something in his eyes suggested he understood more about my situation than I had revealed. I rejoined the gathering as everyone was moving toward the formal dining room. The massive table could seat 20, though today only 12 places were set with fine china and multiple crystal glasses at each setting. Name cards and calligraphy directed everyone to their assigned seats. I found myself between Cousin Tiffany's fiance Bradley and Uncle Richard's business associate Frank Holbrook. The meal was an elaborate affair, 5 courses of beautifully presented food that I barely tasted through my anxiety. Under normal circumstances, this kind of meal would have been a rare treat, but today each bite felt like part of my disguise. I noticed Jake savoring every mouthful, occasionally glancing at others to confirm which fork to use. Conversation flowed around business ventures, luxury vacations, and gossip about people whose names I did not recognize. I contributed when directly addressed, but otherwise focused on maintaining my composure. Across the table, Tiffany was describing her recent trip to the Maldives, where apparently the overwater bungalow had disappointed her with its limited butler service. First world problems, am I right? Frank Holbrook chuckled beside me. I smiled politely, though the comment made me acutely aware of the gulf between their concerns and mine. While Tiffany complained about butler service, I had been calculating whether I could afford both laundry and a hot meal that week. The conversation shifted to current events with Uncle Richard holding forth on economic policy. The problem with most people is they do not understand basic financial principles, he declared. Anyone can build wealth if they simply invest wisely and avoid unnecessary expenditures. Zach nodded vigorously. Exactly. Like my friend Kevin, who keeps complaining about rent while buying takeout coffee every day. I told him, make your own coffee, and in 30 years you will have a down payment. He laughed at his own joke. My fingers tightened around my water glass. The simplistic bootstrap narrative ignored so many realities: generational wealth, unequal starting points, systemic barriers. I had been making my own coffee for years and was still sleeping in my car. What do you think, Marcella? Uncle Richard asked unexpectedly. You are studying business. Surely your professors discuss wealth-building strategies. All eyes turned to me. They do, I said carefully, though they also discuss how economic mobility has decreased in recent decades. The data shows that factors like parental education level and starting capital significantly impact outcomes, regardless of individual choices. A brief silence followed before Uncle Richard frowned slightly. That sounds like the kind of thinking that keeps people from achieving their potential. In my experience, determination outweighs circumstances every time. Speaking of determination, Aunt Patricia interjected smoothly, clearly sensing tension. Tiffany and Bradley have finally set a date for the wedding, June at the Langham Hotel ballroom. The conversation safely redirected, I exhaled slowly. But as dessert was served, Tiffany turned her attention to me. So, Marcella, where are you living these days? Still in that apartment near campus? I moved, actually, I replied, deploying my prepared story. I found a place with 2 roommates closer to my work. It is nothing fancy, but it suits my needs. Roommates at your age, Tiffany mused, as though I were well into my 40s instead of 23. I guess that is the college experience, though. Bradley and I could never share space like that, could we, honey? Bradley, who had barely spoken 3 words to me, nodded in agreement. Our guest house is bigger than most people's entire homes. And what about work? Zach joined in. Still at that coffee place. Yes, and I also wait tables at Bellini in the evenings. I tried to make my 60-hour work week sound like a lifestyle choice rather than a necessity. I love Bellini, exclaimed Frank's wife Sandra. We go there for our anniversary every year. The service is excellent. Perhaps we have seen you there. Possibly. I answered silently, praying she had not been one of my customers. I usually work weeknights. You certainly seem to know a lot about coffee preparation for someone studying business, Zach remarked with a smirk. Planning to open a chain of cafes after graduation. Actually, customer service experience is valuable in any business context, I replied evenly. Understanding frontline operations gives you insight you cannot get from spreadsheets alone. Uncle Richard raised an eyebrow. An interesting perspective, though in my experience, time spent on the front lines is better invested in strategic networking. You will never make real money serving others. The irony of his statement spoken while Martinez silently cleared his plate was apparently lost on him. I bit my tongue, reminding myself that this dinner would eventually end, and I could return to my car home where at least I did not have to pretend. As the meal concluded, I excused myself to use the restroom, needing a moment of privacy to regroup. In the opulent guest bathroom with its marble countertops and plush hand towels, I stared at my reflection. The woman looking back at me seemed like a stranger wearing a costume that did not quite fit. How had my life diverged so dramatically from my cousins who shared my blood, but apparently not my reality? I splashed cold water on my wrists, a trick my mother had taught me to calm nerves, and took several deep breaths. Just a few more hours, and this performance would be over. What I did not realize was that the real performance was just beginning, and the audience was about to become much more critical. After dinner, the family migrated to the living room for coffee and digestives. Uncle Richard poured aged cognac into crystal snifters, while Aunt Patricia arranged herself elegantly on a white leather sofa that probably cost more than a year of my tuition. Jake had disappeared with some younger cousins to check out the game room downstairs, leaving me without my buffer. "So, Marcella," Uncle Richard began once everyone was settled, swirling his cognac thoughtfully, "your grandmother mentioned you have been under some financial strain since the apartment situation changed. Is everything stable now?" The question caught me off guard. Grandma knew I had moved out of my previous apartment, but had no idea I was living in my car. What exactly had she told him? "Things are fine," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "The cost of living near campus is high, but I am managing." "And the scholarship is still covering tuition," he pressed. "Partially. I make up the difference with my jobs." I shifted uncomfortably under his scrutiny. "Two jobs while carrying a full course load seems excessive," Aunt Patricia commented, her voice dripping with what sounded like concern but felt like judgment. "Surely there are other options. Have you considered taking a semester off to work full-time? Or perhaps downsizing your living arrangements further?" If only she knew how downsized my living had already become. "I am determined to graduate on schedule," I said firmly. "Taking time off would only delay my ability to secure better employment." Zach, who had been scrolling through his phone, looked up with sudden interest. "Where did you say you were living now? I have a friend who manages properties near Westlake. Maybe he could find you a better deal." "I am happy with my current situation, but thank you." I tried to redirect the conversation. "How is your new position at the company, Zach? Are you enjoying the work?" "It is challenging but rewarding," he replied automatically before narrowing his eyes. "You know, it is strange. I drove by the Camden Apartments last week for a business meeting, and I could have sworn I saw your car in the parking lot of that 24-hour gym nearby. Do you work out there?" My heart skipped a beat. "I have a membership at Planet Fitness. It is convenient because they have multiple locations. At 7 in the morning on a Tuesday," Zach persisted. "That is dedication." "I like to exercise before my morning classes," I said, trying to keep my voice casual while panic bloomed in my chest. "The early bird gets the worm, right?" Tiffany, who had been whispering with Bradley, suddenly focused on our conversation. "I noticed you have a gym bag in your car. Do you go straight from workouts to class? That does not sound very hygienic." Her nose wrinkled slightly. "The gym has showers," I answered, feeling increasingly cornered. "Marcella has always been practical." Uncle Richard interjected, though his expression had grown thoughtful. "Speaking of your car, I noticed it could use some maintenance. The paint is oxidizing and there seem to be quite a lot of items in the back seat. Are you moving something?" "Just some donations for a campus clothing drive." I lied, cursing myself for not being more thorough in clearing out my car. "I have been meaning to drop them off." Aunt Patricia set down her coffee cup with a delicate clink. "You know, Richard, we should consider helping Marcella with a new vehicle. That old Honda must be on its last legs and safety is so important." The offer, though seemingly generous, made me bristle. I did not want their charity, especially when it came with strings of obligation and gratitude. More importantly, my car was not just transportation, but my shelter. The thought of trading it in for something unfamiliar was actually frightening. "My car runs perfectly fine," I said, perhaps too defensively. "It is paid off and reliable." Just then, Jake bounded into the room, energetic from whatever games he had been playing downstairs. "Marcella, the gaming setup in the basement is insane. 4 huge screens and every system imaginable. We need to get something like that at home." I forced a laugh, maybe when I am a CEO like Uncle Richard. Jake flopped onto the couch beside me. "At least we could get a TV for the apartment. Reading books all the time is so boring." I froze. Jake had never visited my fictional apartment with roommates. He did not know what I had or had not told the family. "Apartment?" Tiffany asked, her perfectly shaped eyebrows rising. I thought you were staying with your grandmother, Jake. Jake looked confused. I am. Marcella visits for dinner on Sundays. An uncomfortable silence settled over the room. Uncle Richard set down his cognac, his gaze sharpening. Marcella, where exactly are you living these days? As I said, I have roommates near campus. I repeated, but the words sounded hollow even to my own ears. Let me get you some water, Tiffany said suddenly, standing up. You look flushed. Before I could protest, she had left the room. I felt a growing sense of dread, like watching an approaching storm with nowhere to shelter. When Tiffany returned, she did not have water. Instead, she had her phone in hand, her expression a mix of triumph and false concern. I just texted my friend who goes to Westlake. She says there is a girl who matches your description who uses the campus facilities constantly. People call her the library ghost because she is always there from opening until closing. My face burned as all eyes turned to me. Is there something you are not telling us, Marcella? Uncle Richard asked, his voice unnervingly calm. Before I could formulate a response, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen reflexively. It was Mrs. Kessler, my manager from the restaurant, probably calling about tomorrow's shift. Under normal circumstances, I would have ignored it, but in my flustered state, I answered without thinking. Hello? Marcella, I hate to do this to you, but Jenny called in sick again. Can you cover her lunch shift tomorrow in addition to your dinner shift? I know you are already working breakfast at your other job, but I am desperate here. I closed my eyes, aware of the complete silence in the room around me. I will figure it out, Mrs. Kessler. Text me the details. I hung up as quickly as possible. When I looked up, Tiffany was staring at me with an expression of gleeful shock. 2 jobs are not enough. You need 3. She turned to the room at large. Something does not add up here. Excuse me? I muttered, standing up abruptly. I need some air. I hurried toward the patio doors, but Tiffany followed me. As the glass door slid closed behind us, cutting off the murmur of conversation from inside, she stepped closer. What are you hiding, Marcella? She asked, her voice dripping with false concern. We are family. You can tell me. For a brief, insane moment, I considered confiding in her. Perhaps beneath the privilege and entitlement, there was some shred of genuine family feeling. But then I saw the eager gleam in her eyes, the anticipation of a juicy revelation she could share. I am not hiding anything, I insisted. My life is just complicated right now. Is it? She tilted her head. Because my friend mentioned something else interesting. She said campus security has been tracking a car that keeps parking overnight in different lots. A Honda Civic, just like yours. Her smile widened as she saw the confirmation in my expression. Oh my God, you are living in your car, are not you? Before I could respond, she had turned and slid open the patio door. Everyone, you are not going to believe this, she announced, her voice carrying clearly into the sudden silence of the living room. I stood frozen on the patio, watching through the glass as Tiffany dramatically shared her discovery. The expressions around the room transformed from confusion to shock to something worse. Pity mixed with morbid fascination, as though I were an exotic animal at the zoo. With leaden feet, I followed Tiffany back inside, knowing the facade I had so carefully constructed had completely collapsed. Whatever happened next would change my relationship with my extended family forever, for better or worse. The silence that followed Tiffany's announcement felt eternal, though it probably lasted only seconds. Everyone stared at me as I stood in the doorway, the warm evening air from the patio still at my back, contrasting with the air-conditioned chill of the living room. Is this true? Uncle Richard finally asked, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. Are you living in your car, Marcella? The question hung in the air. I could feel heat rising to my face, a mixture of shame and anger building in my chest. For a moment I considered continuing the lie, but the evidence was too overwhelming, and frankly I was tired. Tired of pretending, tired of struggling alone, tired of protecting everyone else from the harsh reality of my life. Yes, I admitted, my voice stronger than I expected. I have been living in my car for the past 8 months. Gasps echoed around the room. Aunt Patricia pressed a manicured hand to her chest, as though I had announced a terminal illness. My God, Richard, did you hear that? Your own niece homeless? I am not homeless, I corrected, though the distinction felt semantic even to me. I have a place to sleep. It is just not conventional. Not conventional, Zach repeated with a disbelieving laugh. That is one way to put it. Why would you do something so extreme? Are you trying to make some kind of political statement about housing costs? His dismissive tone ignited something inside me. The careful restraint I had maintained all evening began to crumble. This is not a social experiment or a choice, Zach. After my parents died, there was almost nothing left. I am putting myself through college while supporting Jake, and something had to give. Housing was the only flexible expense I could eliminate. But why did not you ask for help? Aunt Patricia pressed. We are family. I looked at her incredulously. Ask for help. The last time we saw you was at the funeral where you spent 15 minutes talking about how inconvenient it was to find black designer clothing on short notice. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Uncle Richard stepped forward, his businessman's composure returning. This is clearly a difficult situation, he said in the same tone he probably used for challenging board meetings. But there are resources for people in your position. Government assistance, student emergency funds, charitable organizations. I have explored every option. I cut him off. I make too much for government assistance, but not enough to afford rent near campus. The waiting list for affordable student housing is 2 years long. I am doing what I need to do to get through this and create a better future for Jake and myself. Tiffany, who had been watching the exchange with bright-eyed interest, suddenly laughed. Oh my God, it all makes sense now. The cheap clothes always being tired taking food home from family dinners. We have our very own car girl. It is like those YouTube videos. Tiffany, Bradley murmured, looking uncomfortable for the first time all evening. What? She protested. It is kind of impressive in a sad way, like extreme couponing, but for shelter. Her words hit me like physical blows. I had expected judgment or awkward pity, but not to be treated as entertainment, a curiosity to be discussed like a reality TV contestant. Zach joined in, apparently unable to read the room. Does this mean you use the gym just for showers? That is actually pretty smart. Maximizing the membership fee. He chuckled. Though I would hate to think what the car smells like in summer. That is enough, Uncle Richard said sharply. But the damage was done. I could feel tears threatening, but I refused to cry in front of them. Instead, I turned to Jake, who had been silent throughout the exchange. His face was pale eyes, wide with shock and confusion. You lied to me, he said quietly. All those times you said you were fine, that we were managing okay. You have been sleeping in a car while I had a bedroom at Grandma's. His hurt expression was worse than all the mockery. Jake, I was trying to protect you, I began. By lying, by suffering alone. How is that protecting me? His voice cracked with emotion. I am not a child anymore. I could have helped somehow. What could you have done? I asked gently. You needed to focus on school, on healing after we lost Mom and Dad. One of us needed to have some normality. But it should not have been like this, he exclaimed, standing up abruptly. This is wrong, all of it. I moved toward him, but he stepped away, shaking his head. I need a minute, he muttered before rushing from the room. I wanted to follow him, but was stopped by Uncle Richard's hand on my arm. Let him process this, he advised. It is a shock. I jerked away from his touch. Do not tell me how to handle my brother. You have no idea what we have been through. Clearly not. He acknowledged, his expression unreadable. But I would like to help now. Let me write you a check so you can secure proper housing immediately. The offer should have been a relief, but something about his tone, the easy solution of throwing money at the problem, made me bristle. I do not want your money. Do not be prideful, Aunt Patricia interjected. Richard is offering a perfectly reasonable solution. It is not about pride, I replied, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain calm. Where was this concern when our parents died? When we were arranging the funeral alone? When Jake was struggling in school because of his grief? Not once did any of you call to check on us or offer support then. We did not know things were so dire, Uncle Richard defended. You never said anything. Should I have had to? I challenged. You are supposedly family. You knew my parents died suddenly, that I was 20 years old, and suddenly responsible for a teenager. Did you think we were thriving? The room fell silent again. Even Tiffany had the grace to look uncomfortable. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I should go find Jake. I turned toward the door, but my path was blocked by Zach. Wait, Marcella. Let me at least give you some cash for a hotel tonight, he offered, reaching for his wallet. I do not need your handout, I snapped, years of suppressed resentment finally boiling over. What I needed was family who cared enough to be there during the hardest time of our lives. Not your charity when it becomes an entertaining drama for your dinner party. I pushed past him toward the front door, desperate for escape, for the privacy of my car, where at least I answered to no one but myself. As I reached for the handle, I heard footsteps behind me. Running away will not solve anything, Uncle Richard called after me. Let me help you, Marcella. No strings attached. I turned to face him, tears now flowing freely down my cheeks. Your help always comes with strings. It comes with judgment and expectations and the requirement that I be grateful for crumbs from your table. His expression hardened. That is unfair. I am offering substantial assistance. Now, you are offering it now when it is convenient and makes you feel generous. Where were you 3 years ago when we were drowning? Before he could answer, I yanked open the front door and hurried down the steps toward my car. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys, dropping them twice before managing to unlock the door. I slid behind the wheel, inserted the key into the ignition, and turned it. The engine sputtered but did not catch. I tried again with the same result. After a third unsuccessful attempt, I slammed my palms against the steering wheel in frustration. Looking up, I saw several family members watching from the front steps of the mansion. Tiffany was whispering something to Bradley, and I could see Zach actually laughing. The humiliation was complete. I could not even make a dignified exit. As I sat there trapped in my broken home on wheels, Uncle Richard approached and tapped on the window. With great reluctance, I rolled it down a few inches. Let me call my mechanic, he offered. He can be here in 20 minutes. It is Sunday evening, I pointed out bitterly. No mechanic is coming. For me, they will, he replied, the statement so casually entitled that it reignited my anger. Of course they will, I muttered. The world bends for Richard Wilson. He sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. Marcella, I understand you are upset, but this stubborn independence is not serving you well. There is no shame in accepting help when you need it. You think this is about shame, about pride? I demanded, finally stepping out of the car to face him directly. This is about dignity, about being treated like a person, not a project or a cautionary tale or a charity case. By now, Jake had joined the group on the steps, his expression still troubled, but no longer avoiding my gaze. The gathered family created an audience for what was becoming the most honest conversation we had ever had. I have worked 60-hour weeks while maintaining a 3.7 GPA. I continued, my voice growing stronger. I have figured out how to live on less than most people spend on coffee. I have kept Jake in school with good grades and made sure he never missed a baseball game or school event. I have done all this while grieving my parents and trying to build a future. I do not need your pity or your judgment or your belated generosity. What I needed was family. For once, Uncle Richard seemed at a loss for words. In the silence that followed my outburst, Jake descended the steps and came to stand beside me. I am coming with you, he said quietly. Jake, you cannot sleep in the car, I protested. Neither should you, he countered. But if that is where you are, that is where I want to be too. We are in this together. He turned to face the assembled family. All of you live in this bubble where problems get solved with money and connections. You have no idea what it has been like for us. His support brought fresh tears to my eyes, but these were different. Tears of gratitude rather than humiliation. For the first time that evening, I felt like someone truly saw me. Uncle Richard cleared his throat. Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside, he suggested, looking uncomfortable as Martinez and another staff member had appeared in the doorway, clearly witnessing the entire scene. I think we have said everything that needs saying, I replied, turning back to my car. Jake, you should stay at Grandma's. I will figure out the car situation. Actually, Uncle Richard said, his voice unusually hesitant, there is something I have not said, something you should know before you leave. There was something in his tone that made me pause, a vulnerability I had never heard from him before. Despite my anger and humiliation, I found myself curious about what could possibly make Richard Wilson sound uncertain. "What is it?" I asked, expecting perhaps a final attempt at persuasion or a businesslike offer. What I got instead would change everything, though not in any way I could have predicted. "I think we should talk privately," Uncle Richard said, glancing at the audience of family members still watching from the steps. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it here," I replied, too emotionally exhausted for more games. He took a deep breath, seeming to weigh his options before continuing. "I understand more than you might think about your situation, Marcella. Before I built my first company, before the mansion and the cars and all of this," he gestured at the estate around us, "I lived in my car too." Stunned silence followed his revelation. Tiffany's mouth actually fell open, and Zach looked as though someone had just told him the earth was flat. "What are you talking about, Dad?" Zach finally asked. "You always said you started your business from your apartment." "That was the sanitized version," Uncle Richard replied, not meeting his son's eyes. "The truth is, I was homeless for nearly 6 months when I was 22. I had dropped out of college to pursue my business idea, and my parents cut me off financially. I slept in a 1978 Chevy Nova while working as a security guard at night and building my first prototype during the day." I stared at him in disbelief. "You were homeless, and you still made fun of people who struggle financially." He had the grace to look ashamed. "I did not make fun. I just separated myself from that part of my life. Once I became successful, I convinced myself it was all due to my hard work and determination. I rewrote my own history to fit the narrative I wanted to believe." "And you never thought to share this with your children?" Aunt Patricia asked, her voice higher than usual. "I had no idea." "Why would I?" he countered. "It was humiliating. I wanted to protect you all from knowing how close I came to complete failure. And as time passed, it became easier to pretend it never happened." His confession shifted something in the atmosphere. The smirks had disappeared from my cousins' faces, replaced by confusion, and in Zach's case, what looked almost like betrayal. "So all those lectures about pulling myself up by my bootstraps," Zach began, "were partially motivated by my own fear," Uncle Richard admitted. "Fear that acknowledging systemic barriers would somehow diminish what I had accomplished. Fear that my children might face the same struggles I did." He turned back to me, his expression more genuine than I had ever seen it. "When your father chose teaching over joining my business, I resented him. I thought he was rejecting everything I had built, everything I had suffered for. But the truth is, I envied his contentment, his ability to find joy in a life that was not defined by wealth and status." "Dad was happy," I agreed quietly. "He loved his work and his family. That was enough for him." Uncle Richard nodded. "I know that now. And I see so much of him in you, Marcella. The determination, the integrity, the willingness to sacrifice for those you love." He glanced at Jake, who was listening intently. "What I failed to understand until this moment is that family is not about genetic connection or obligatory holiday gatherings. It is about showing up when it matters." "Which you did not do," Jake pointed out bluntly. "No, I did not," Uncle Richard agreed. "And that failure is entirely mine, not yours. I was so caught up in my own success story that I forgot the people who helped me along the way. I forgot what it feels like to be struggling and alone." Aunt Patricia had descended the steps and now stood beside her husband, her expression conflicted. "Richard, why did not you ever tell me?" "Because I was ashamed," he admitted. "Not just of having been homeless, but of how completely I tried to erase that part of myself. The more successful I became, the more I distanced myself from my past. I created this persona of the self-made man who succeeded through sheer will and intelligence, when the reality included a lot of luck and the kindness of others." As he spoke, I noticed the staff members exchanging glances. Martinez in particular was watching Uncle Richard with an expression I could not quite read, something between surprise and validation. "The night watchman at the office park where I parked my car used to bring me coffee." Uncle Richard continued, his voice distant with memory. "He never called security on me, never reported me to management. Without his small kindness, I might have been arrested for trespassing, lost my security job, lost everything." He refocused on me. What I am trying to say, Marcella, is that I understand. Not completely. Your circumstances are your own, but I know something of what you are going through. And I am deeply sorry that I failed you as family when you needed support. His apology, unexpectedly sincere, left me momentarily speechless. Before I could formulate a response, Grandma's voice called from the doorway. It is about time you admitted that, Richard. All heads turned to see my grandmother making her way down the steps with the assistance of Martinez. Despite her earlier claim of arthritis keeping her home, she had apparently decided to come after all. Mom, Uncle Richard looked genuinely surprised. I thought you were not feeling well enough to join us. I was not feeling well enough to watch you pretend to be something you are not, she replied crisply. But Martinez called me when things started getting interesting. She nodded gratefully to the butler, who gave a slight bow in acknowledgement. She made her way to where I stood by my car. Marcella, why did not you tell me you were sleeping in your car? Did you think I would judge you? I did not want you to worry, I admitted. You are already doing so much by giving Jake a stable home. Family helps family, she said firmly. That is how it should be. She turned a pointed look at Uncle Richard. Something your uncle seems to have forgotten until now. Uncle Richard actually looked chastened. I have made mistakes, Mom. Serious ones. Yes, you have, she agreed without hesitation. But admission is the first step toward making things right. She glanced around at the assembled family. This is not a spectator sport, people. If we are family, we act like it. That means supporting each other, not gawking when someone is in trouble. Her words seemed to break the spell that had kept everyone frozen in place. Aunt Patricia stepped forward. Marcella should stay here tonight. We have plenty of room. I am not staying here, I said firmly, though with less anger than before. But thank you for the offer. Then let me pay for a hotel while your car gets fixed, Uncle Richard suggested. I was about to refuse again when Jake put his hand on my arm. Sis, we need to be practical. The car will not start, and we need somewhere to sleep tonight. His reasonableness made me pause. Was I rejecting help out of pride rather than principle? Was I making the same mistake Uncle Richard had made, letting stubbornness override sense? I can accept help for tonight, I finally conceded, but this does not fix everything. Of course not, Uncle Richard agreed quickly. This is just a starting point. I would like the opportunity to really talk about how I can support you and Jake in a way that respects your independence. For the first time that evening, his words seemed genuinely thoughtful rather than condescending. I nodded slowly. We can talk tomorrow, after I've had some sleep in a real bed. A small smile tugged at his lips. That sounds reasonable. As arrangements were made for a hotel and a tow truck for my car, I found myself standing slightly apart from the family, processing the dramatic shift in dynamics. Tiffany approached hesitantly, her earlier mockery replaced by uncharacteristic awkwardness. I am sorry about what I said earlier, she offered, not quite meeting my eyes. It was cruel and thoughtless. Yes, it was. I agreed, not making it easy for her. I have never had to worry about money or housing or anything, really, she continued. That is not an excuse, just a fact. I do not know how to relate to what you are going through. You could start by trying to understand rather than judge, I suggested, by asking questions instead of making assumptions. She nodded, looking genuinely contrite. I would like to learn, if you are willing to teach me. It was not a perfect apology, but it seemed sincere. We will see, I replied, neither accepting nor rejecting her olive branch. Some wounds would take time to heal. As a luxury SUV was arranged to take Jake and me to a nearby hotel, I looked back at the mansion with its manicured grounds and gleaming windows. For the first time, I saw it not as a symbol of what I lacked, but as a facade hiding its own complicated truths. Uncle Richard's revelation had changed the narrative, making me wonder how many other success stories contained hidden chapters of struggle and chance. The evening had begun with shame and ended with unexpected honesty. It was not a happy ending. There was too much hurt for that. But perhaps it was the beginning of something truer than what had come before. Only time would tell if this newfound understanding would lead to real change or fade away like so many well-intentioned moments. As we drove away from the estate, Jake squeezed my hand. No more secrets between us. Okay, whatever happens, we face it together. I squeezed back, grateful beyond words for his unwavering support. Together, I agreed, watching the mansion recede in the rear window. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for tonight, the truth was finally out, and with it, the possibility of genuine connection that had been missing for too long. 6 months passed after that fateful family gathering, bringing changes I could never have anticipated. The morning after our confrontation, Uncle Richard had arranged for my car to be towed to his personal mechanic. What I had feared was a fatal engine problem turned out to be a relatively simple fix, a failing fuel pump that was replaced within a day. But that was just the beginning. True to his word, Uncle Richard wanted to talk about how he could support Jake and me in a meaningful way. Over breakfast at the hotel, he laid out a proposal that surprised me with its thoughtfulness. I am not offering charity, he had explained carefully. I am proposing an investment in family. His offer included several components. First, he wanted to establish an educational trust for both Jake and me that would cover tuition and reasonable living expenses. Second, he offered the use of his guest house for Jake while he finished high school, allowing him to stay in the same school district, but with more space than at Grandma's apartment. Third, he wanted to help me find affordable housing near campus, with the understanding that I would continue working at least one job to maintain my independence. I will not accept these terms unless you agree to reduce your work hours, I countered. 60 hours a week plus full-time studies is not sustainable. He had smiled, recognizing his own stubbornness reflected back at him. 20 hours a week maximum. Focus on your education. 30 hours, I negotiated, and I choose which job to keep. We eventually settled on 25 hours a week, with the understanding that I would keep the coffee shop job that offered more flexible scheduling around my classes. The restaurant job, with its late hours and unpredictable tips, was reluctantly but gratefully relinquished. The adjustment was not immediate or smooth. Years of resentment and misunderstanding could not be erased by a single evening of honesty, no matter how cathartic. There were awkward family dinners where Tiffany tried too hard to relate to my experiences, asking tone-deaf questions about what it was like to be poor. There were moments when Uncle Richard slipped back into condescension, offering unsolicited advice about career paths as though his way was the only road to success. But there were also genuine efforts at connection. Zach, shaken by the revelation of his father's hidden past, began volunteering at a youth homeless shelter, occasionally asking for my input on how to make the services more accessible and dignified. Aunt Patricia, in her own way, tried to bridge the gap by inviting me shopping, an activity I had little interest in, but recognized as her attempt at bonding. The most significant change came from an unexpected source. When the dean of students at Westlake University somehow learned about my housing situation, I suspected Uncle Richard's influence. I was called into her office. Instead of the disciplinary meeting, I feared she offered an additional scholarship that had suddenly become available, plus a position as a resident advisor in one of the dormitories, a role that came with free housing. We value students who demonstrate extraordinary perseverance. She told me, her expression suggesting she knew exactly how orchestrated this opportunity was, but was willing to play along. Your academic performance, despite your circumstances, is exactly what this scholarship was designed to support. With the combination of reduced work hours, secure housing, and additional financial support, my life transformed. I moved into the residence hall, my car once again becoming simply transportation rather than shelter. I began sleeping regular hours, eating proper meals, and even occasionally enjoying social activities with fellow students. Jake thrived in the guest house arrangement, though he insisted on maintaining Sunday dinners with Grandma to ensure she was not lonely. His grades improved further, and with more stability, his natural leadership abilities emerged. He was elected captain of the baseball team and began receiving interest from college scouts. As for Uncle Richard, our relationship evolved in unexpected ways. Once he stopped trying to mold me into a miniature version of himself and actually listened to my goals and values, we discovered common ground in our determination and analytical thinking. He began asking for my perspective on business matters, valuing my insight as someone who had experienced both struggle and academic rigor. The most profound change, however, was not in our external circumstances, but in how our family functioned. The facade of perfection had been shattered, replaced by something messier but more authentic. At family gatherings, conversations became more genuine, touching on real struggles and vulnerabilities, rather than superficial achievements and acquisitions. Tiffany postponed her lavish wedding instead, opting for a year of international volunteer work that her father reluctantly funded. "I need to see more of the world before I commit to anything," she explained when announcing her decision. The old Tiffany would never have questioned her prescribed path of marriage and social prominence. Zach gradually shifted his role in Uncle Richard's company, moving from executive management to community outreach and corporate social responsibility. "I am still learning the business," he told me during a rare moment of humility, "but from a different angle than Dad did." On a personal level, I learned that accepting help did not mean surrendering dignity or independence. It meant acknowledging our fundamental interconnectedness as humans and as family. The stubborn self-reliance that had kept me sleeping in my car had been both a strength and a limitation, protecting my pride while preventing genuine connection. Today, I sat in my small but comfortable campus apartment, reflecting on the journey of the past 6 months. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake, sending a photo of his latest baseball trophy with the caption, "Coming to campus this weekend to show you in person." I smiled, feeling a surge of pride in the young man he was becoming. Another text followed this one from Uncle Richard: "Quarterly family dinner this Sunday. Martinez asked specifically if you were coming. Apparently your critique of my wine selection last time impressed him." I laughed, appreciating how our relationship had evolved to include gentle teasing. I would attend the dinner, but now on my own terms, as an equal member of the family rather than an outsider looking in. The journey from sleeping in my car to rebuilding family connections had been unexpected and sometimes painful. But through it all, I had maintained the one thing that mattered most: my sense of self-worth, not tied to material possessions or status, but to the integrity with which I faced challenges and the love I gave freely to those who mattered. Life would continue to present obstacles. That was its nature. But I would face them now with the knowledge that success is not measured by the size of your home or the balance of your bank account, but by the strength of your character and the authenticity of your connections. And that perhaps was the greatest lesson from my time living in a car while working 2 jobs and studying full-time. True wealth lies not in what you own, but in who you become through adversity, and who stands beside you when the truth is finally revealed. Have you ever had to make difficult choices to pursue your education or dreams? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength in challenging situations. Remember that your worth is never determined by your circumstances, and that authentic connections are more valuable than any material possession. Thank you for listening, and until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Remember that your worth is never determined by your circumstances, and that authentic connections are more valuable than any material possession. Thank you for listening, and until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.